Okay, good afternoon. My name is Christopher Diorio, and this is edition number 17 of ChrisChat. Today we're going to talk, as we usually do when we talk about these issues and talk about issues related to your interactions on a day-to-day basis. I want to try to talk you through a question that was raised to me multiple times about what your rights are in regards to photographing or recording anybody, in public, first of all, but most importantly for these purposes, is what your rights are in terms of photographing or recording law enforcement. A lot of folks who are going out and witnessing protests, etc., if you're going out to marches or demonstrations, or even if you're just on the street, certain neighborhoods, and you see something going on where you don't necessarily believe that what's happening in regards to a police interaction is correct or lawful, and your inclination is to record it, to put it online, or to do something at least to memorialize it. And far too many people feel threatened or otherwise harmed or potentially harmed or maybe even arrested by police or other law enforcement individuals when it comes to these interactions. So I want to walk you through what it is that your rights are in terms of photographing or recording individuals online, with your phone, with regular photography or any other type of digital media, what it is that your rights are. First of all, and I'll talk generally about because we're not just all in Massachusetts, a lot of you are, but I want to talk generally about things. But Massachusetts has some specific rules. In general, when it comes to just recording a conversation or recording something either by audio or video means, regardless of whether it's with a film camera or with your phone, most states are what we call one-party consent states. All that means is that if you are recording the conversation, you are the only person who needs to know that it's being recorded, and you do not have to notify anybody else of the recording. That's federal law as well. That's in the United States Code. The United States federal government only requires one person to be involved in a telephone call or a video recording for it to be allowable by law. Massachusetts is not one of those one-party consent states, nor is the state of Connecticut. Connecticut, California, Massachusetts, Florida, Illinois, all of those states are what we call two-party consent states. What that means is that you cannot secretly, and that secretly is important here, you cannot secretly record someone without them knowing that they're being recorded. So both parties, and it's called a two-party consent rule, but really it's an all-party consent rule, because you may start recording someone, and if you are involved with one other person and you're recording them and they know it's happening, but a third or fourth or fifth person is involved and you don't tell them that everything is being recorded and it's not obvious that the recording is happening, then you have to go about the process of notifying them and getting their consent. Now, if you don't get their consent, is it your problem? Potentially, yes. But the rule generally states that if a person does not consent to being recorded, it is up to them to terminate the conversation or to walk away from the recording. It's not necessarily up to you to stop the recording. So that's just and that applies to audio recording, that applies to video, that telephone, whatever you're doing. All of those things require, in Massachusetts, Connecticut, California, Illinois, Florida, you have to have all parties involved. They all have to know and they all have to consent. The rule basically when it comes to Massachusetts is you want to prevent secret recordings. If it's obvious, if everybody knows that there's a recording going on, then you can go ahead and do it. You don't have to necessarily know it. If everybody knows that this is being recorded, Everybody knows. And you don't have to, the idea here is to prevent secretive recordings. And that's the same thing when it comes to law enforcement. And most importantly, when it comes to law enforcement, the idea in Massachusetts, as far as the two-party consent rule or the all-party consent rule, is that all parties have to know what's going on and then have to consent to it. That's just in general, with general individuals. What about law enforcement? You are permitted, and this is the mistake that people make right at the outset. The First Amendment protects you. Taking photographs of things that are plainly visible, including people, from public spaces is a constitutional right, and that specifically includes federal buildings, transportation facilities, police and government officials carrying out their duties. If you are in a public place, and so are they, you can record them. Unfortunately, what we have is a widespread continuing pattern of law enforcement ordering people, don't take that photograph and give me that camera, and you're in public places and they're restricting you from doing things. And to the point where they will harass the individuals who are doing it, they will lay hands on you, they will detain individuals, arrest people who fail to comply with their demands, and I call them demands, they're not requests. They're demanding you to stop, and sometimes they will even take your phone and order you to delete what you have recorded. All of that is unconstitutional and wrong. So I want to walk you through some basics. And again, if you have questions, specific questions you want to ask, by all means, ask them here. If they come to you later on, you by all means can do that later on and put a message in to me privately, or if you want to just tag the recording, by all means do so. The basics are this. Whenever you are in a public space where you are lawfully present and have the right to be, you have the right to photograph anything that is in plain view. That includes pictures of, as I said, a federal building. That includes pictures of transportation facilities, including Boston Logan Airport, and we'll talk specifically about Logan in a second, and any Massport facilities, because there are rules specific to them, and TSA has their own set of rules. The photo, you have, the right to photograph or record by audio or video means. You have the right to do so. There's a question here, what if there's a phone call with two people in two different states? An interstate phone call is covered by federal law. And therefore I would state that the one-party rule applies. To be safe, if you are in Massachusetts or if you are in another two-party or all-party consent state, the safe thing to do if you're recording them is to notify them that they're being recorded. And again, like I said, it's up to them to walk away from the recording if they know that they're being recorded. So let me step back to this. Any photography in any form in a public place where you have a right to be is considered basically public oversight over the government. It is an essential aspect of your rights to redress in a free society, is being able to record what's happening. So in public places where you have the right to be, you have the right to record anything and anyone. However, if you are on private property, the private property, and this applies to, and people look at a mall, say, as being public because it's a place of public accommodation, it is still technically private property for these rules and these rules only. In a situation where you're talking about private property, the property owner sets the rules about the taking of photographs. And if you disobey the private property owner's rules regarding recording or photographing or anything of that nature, they can order you off the property, no different than if you were a trespasser, and they can have you arrested for trespassing. So draw the line and make sure your line is drawn brightly. Public property, you can do pretty much anything, including recording the police, recording law enforcement, FBI, DEA. They'll all live long day. You can record at the MBTA. You can record on the train. You can record in certain respects in the airport. You can do that as long as you're in a public place and you have the right to be there. But private property, you are restricted by the owner of the private property's rules. So what happens if you're recording law enforcement? This is the question that comes up a lot. And we've seen these videos where, people take out their phones now and they're ubiquitous and you can record pretty much anything. If a police officer comes up to you and orders you, give me that phone, and I want you to delete what you just, police officers may not confiscate or demand to view, they can't even look at it. They cannot demand to view your digital photographs or your video without a warrant. There's a case recently from California, Riley versus California, another piggyback case here in Massachusetts that dealt with the same things, where the Supreme Court in Riley versus California said very specifically that the police cannot search the contents of a cell phone without a warrant. They made the analogy that now your cell phone is the equivalent of your papers and your effects, no different than a file cabinet in your own home. And so securing it digitally is no different than locking your front door. And just like with a home where they would need a warrant to go in and open your file cabinets in your home and search in a location, they're required to have a warrant to search or even look at the contents of your cell phone. And this is as a result of Supreme Court rulings in Massachusetts. Specifically to law enforcement, Glick versus Cuniff says from a 2011 case that law enforcement cannot make you stop. They cannot stop you from recording them. If you're in a public place, you can record them as long as you're not impeding their progress in doing their job. The Supreme Court has ruled the police may not search your cell phone when they arrest you unless they get a warrant. And although the court in that Riley decision didn't specifically rule on other electronic devices like standalone cameras or video cameras or anything like that, the ACLU, who brought the lawsuit in Riley and supported the Riley decision, the Constitution broadly protects warrantless searches of any type of digital data. It is possible that courts may approve the temporary warrantless seizure of your camera in extreme circumstances. What are extreme circumstances? The same as they would be to vault over the warrant requirement in general. If it's necessary to save someone's life, if you recorded something that has information that might in fact lead to finding a body that might get killed, or if the police have some good faith probable cause that doing so is necessary to prevent the destruction of evidence of a crime, no different than anything else that they can do to vault over a warrant. They can do that with a phone as well. But in general, they cannot take your phone. They cannot ask you to. If they ask you and you consent, then so be it. Game's over. But they cannot make you do it. The police may also not make you delete your photographs or your videos under any circumstances. Law enforcement in Nebraska and Illinois and California have faced, and Massachusetts in that Cuniff case that I mentioned, officers have faced felony charges of evidence tampering as well as obstruction of justice charges and theft for taking a memory card from a phone or taking a photographer's memory card in the 2011 case in Massachusetts from a camera. So they cannot take it's theft. So they're not permitted to do so. Now, that's in public. And in general, as I said, in general, you have the right to record law enforcement doing anything as long as you are in a public location. But and here's where the exceptions come in, and here's where you have to be a good doobie and not necessarily put yourself in trouble. Police officers can order citizens to cease activities that are actually interfering with legitimate law enforcement operations. If you are taking your camera and the officer's in the middle of an arrest and you're taking your camera and putting it between the officer and the person they're trying to arrest, well, guess what? You're obstructing the officer in doing his job, and you're going to have a problem. Police officers have to realize that what they're doing on the street is subject to public scrutiny, including people just like you photographing them, recording them, audio or videotaping them. They understand that is part of their job, whether they like it or not. Well, tough. But you cannot get in their way while they are doing their job, because at that point you have an issue. You do not, as part of your right to record, you do not then have piggyback on that, and that gives you the right to break other laws. If you're trespassing, if you step from public property onto private property, you can still be charged with trespass. If you are walking into as we talk about in a second, if you walk into a restricted area at Boston Logan, you can be charged with violating a restricted area. They can take you out, they can arrest you, they can do the whole federal, glove in the body cavity search thing. You don't want that. Be smart. Regardless of what you believe you have the right to do, at all points, what I'm going to advise you to do is be smart. Question here. For non-police interactions, if a person is in fear for their safety or their life, is a person in Massachusetts permitted by law to record the interaction without all parties' consent? No. No, there's no exception. We are an all-party consent state. And you simply have to notify them at the beginning of the conversation or at the beginning of any interaction that this is being recorded. And as I said at the beginning, it's up to them to absent themselves from the conversation. You can continue to record. The idea and the notion behind the law, behind Section 99, is you cannot secretly record. The case from 2007, the law enforcement was being recorded. They told the individual at that point to stop recording, and so the person took his phone and put it in his pocket, but he left it on, and it continued to audio record what was going on. At that point, that's a problem. You've now violated. You can't secretly record people in Massachusetts, in California, in Connecticut, in Florida, in Illinois, and 6 other states without their permission. The idea is to protect against secret recordings. But if it's obvious what you're doing, it's up to them to either stand and be recognized or not. Let's see, where are we going next? If you do I want to talk specifically about, because people have questions about the airport, people have questions about the MBTA and train stations and South Station, things of that nature. There is no, contrary to what the TSA might tell you, there is no prohibition on photographing or filming or audio or video recording in TSA. You can do it in the airport. Anywhere you have a right to be, you can record. But, and here's the unless, as far as TSA is concerned, first, you cannot do so if it interferes with their ability to screen people. So if you're getting in their way while they're trying to search bags or something of that nature, or search an individual, and you're impeding them from doing their job, then yes, you have a problem there. You can record what they're doing, but you cannot interfere with what they're doing, especially when it comes to TSA's essential screening function. You also cannot impede the progress of passengers. If you can't stand in their way, you can't stop people from moving about the airport, you can't create a nuisance in the airport, you cannot impede passengers' progress, and you cannot, in operations or things of that nature, general specific airport operations, you can't stand in the line of people trying to get onto a particular airplane and record them and stop them from coming in. You can't stop or impede basic airport operations, and you cannot impede the passage of passengers. There's a specific CMR, Code of Massachusetts Regulations, it's a separate statutory body, that says that you also cannot record in what they call restricted areas. And if you do record in restricted areas, they can ask you to surrender your phone, and if you do not surrender the phone, they can take the phone from you and potentially confiscate anything they find on it that was recorded against their regulations. So those are Massport rules, and those are TSA rules. So those apply to Boston Logan. Those apply to the airport in New Hampshire. They apply to TSA anywhere in the United States. It also applies here specifically in Massachusetts to any Massport facilities. Train station, South Station, North Station, wherever you are, you have the right to record. It's a public place, and you have the right to record the normal goings-on in that place. So What happens if you are stopped or detained for taking photographs that you believe that you have the right to take? First of all, as I've said in all of these videos that I've done, I am not encouraging you to be a jackass. Don't. It doesn't help you. What I am encouraging you to do is know your rights. If you are involved with law enforcement, A, remain polite. Do not physically resist an officer. At that point, what you're doing is giving them an excuse to escalate. Do not physically resist. If you are stopped for taking pictures or video or anything of that nature, the question that you ask in those situations, it's the same thing, again, that I've talked about in all of these things when you have law enforcement interactions. The question that you have to ask is, am I free to go? Because law enforcement has the right to ask you basic questions. They can get your basic information, your name, your address, and you have to show them a photo ID or any other type of identifying information and put it in their hands. And that's all you have to do in law enforcement interactions. And if they continue to detain you and ask you questions, you ask, am I free to go? And if the officer at that point says, yes, you go. If the officer says no, then at that point it's a detention. And it's something that kicks in a bunch of other protections for you and requirements for them. Under the law, the officer cannot do that without reasonable suspicion that you either have committed a crime or are about to commit a crime. So until you ask to leave, your being stopped is considered voluntary. So that's why that am I free to go question is so tremendously important. If you and it's a legal question for you to ask. You can ask that question if you wish. If at that point the officer does say, yes, you are being detained, he said, if you're detained, the next question that you ask is, what crime am I being suspected of committing? You're allowed to know the charges. They have to tell you. The officer, you then at that point, if they're saying it has something to do with the photography or the recording, you can then remind the officer that taking photographs is your right under the First Amendment and does not constitute reasonable suspicion of a criminal activity. You do not have, it's not something they can charge you with. It's not something they can charge you with. You have the right to photograph them. You have the right to record them. So if that's what they're saying they detained you for, again, politely tell them that this is your First Amendment right to record these things and that going further with the detention is a violation of your First Amendment rights. When it comes to videotaping, there are special considerations. And there's an important distinction. Hello, Paul Warner. There are important distinctions with regards to videotaping. It's a legal distinction between a visual photographic record, which is fully protected, and the audio portion of the videotape. Massachusetts has what they call a state wiretapping law, and it refers to recordings. Some states have it. Massachusetts, if at that point, all you need to do to vault over the problem is letting everybody know they're being recorded. And at that point, the audio is fine, the video is fine. Wiretapping laws and audio laws are generally intended to protect the privacy of people who are being audio bugged, who are being recorded illicitly, private conversations being recorded. If you're doing that with a private individual, the rules are different than if you are doing so where you are audio recording law enforcement in the pursuit of their duties. You are permitted to record those communications. In states that allow recording with one-party consent, as opposed to Massachusetts, which again, I'm telling you, is a two-party or all-party consent state. In states that allow the recording with just one party, you can tape your own interactions with law enforcement all you wish without violating any wiretap statutes at all. You are one of the parties, so you can record it. Question, when can I not record video only? Can police refuse to be recorded? Like I said at the beginning, they understand that this is part of your right to do so. You are permitted in public places to record law enforcement in the normal engagement of their duties or the abnormal engagement of their duties, which is what more importantly here, you're not just filming police officers on a day-to-day basis. But It's up to any other person to vacate the conversation if they're being recorded. They can't stop you. If you want to go back to the beginning of the video, and we talk all about that. In situations where you are an observer, like say you're a third party, and you are not part of the conversation when it comes to an audio recording, or in a state like Massachusetts that requires all parties to consent, the legality of your recording is going to depend very specifically on whether the state's prohibition to record applies only when there's a reasonable expectation of privacy. And that's a story for another day. But no state court, and I'll repeat that, no state court, not a single court in any of the 50 states here in the United States, has ever held that police officers performing their job in public have a reasonable expectation of privacy in what they're doing. They're public and they're doing a public job. They can't claim that what they're doing is private. So you are allowed to record them both audio and video. Any laws that ban the taping of public officials' public statements without their consent, I would contend are violations of the First Amendment. Then there are laws, you can go and look at what the state wiretapping laws are. Very specifically in Massachusetts, Chapter 272, Section 99 refers very specifically to secret recordings. That's what they're trying to prevent. You have the right as well. One of the other questions that was asked to me previously was, can you record hearings? Can you record in court? The courtrooms have specific rules, but public hearings in public places like municipal bodies, if you wanted to go to a city council meeting or something of that nature, again, as long as you know they're doing things in public, the only thing you can't record is what's called executive session. You can't record there, but you can record anything in public as long as you notify people that you are, in fact, doing a recording. And if anybody else gets up and talks, then you have to notify them and remind them that what they're saying is being recorded. So that's. I want to talk specifically about, again, photography at the airport. TSA acknowledges, as I said, photography is permitted in and around airline security checkpoints as long as you're not interfering with the screening process. They do ask, and it is in their rules, that you can't photograph the security monitors. You can't take pictures of what they're taking pictures of. Local rules may apply. The rules that I'm talking about here regarding Boston Logan and Massport may be different in other airports. So before you go off half-cocked and think that you're doing something right, you should check in advance to make sure. What constitutes notification? Telling them or putting up something in plain view. If you indicate to someone that I am recording this conversation, I'm recording this interaction, that's it. And it's up to them to consent. Same thing with a sign. If you notice when you get these phone calls from businesses, or if you call businesses and they say this telephone call is being recorded for quality assurance, first of all, that's crap. They're recording it so that they can protect themselves, but they're giving you notice, and at that point you can either agree to stay on the call or not. It's always up to you as the second person in to make the choice as to whether you're going to stay in the conversation or not. If you are told you cannot take photographs in an airport, you're allowed to ask for the rules. And like I said, the TSA rule that I cited previously is a general statement regarding the rules. And that's right in the TSA regulations of the United States Code as far as what you're permitted to do and what you're not permitted to do and what they're not permitted to do as well. So to sum up, you have the right, whenever you are in a public place where you are lawfully present to be, you have the right to record or photograph anyone or anything. If it's in public and you have the right to be there, you have the right to record them. If it's in plain view, you're not allowed to move things around to get a better shot. That includes pictures, as I said, of federal buildings, transportation facilities, law enforcement, police departments, anything. You can record them. It is an essential form of public oversight over your government, as far as the First Amendment is concerned, to be able to record these things and memorialize them, especially if there is a problem regarding the performance of those duties. Public property, public permission, you can do pretty much anything. In Massachusetts, we are a two-party or an all-party consent state. You cannot secretly record another person. You have to let them know that they're being recorded. Massachusetts, Connecticut, California, Florida, Illinois, Maryland, Montana, New Hampshire is another one that requires two-party consent. So any of you up in New Hampshire, it's a two-party consent state. Pennsylvania and Washington, those are the two-party consent states, or all-party consent. Every place else, all it requires is one person, and that one person is you. I know that I'm recording you. You don't have to let them know. Even federal law under 12 U.S.C., I believe it's Section 18, if I'm not mistaken, 251, permits you to record one party. So you're allowed to record in public places, private property, private places, and that does include, like I said, private property. A mall is considered private property, even though the public has access to it. A shopping mall or a shopping center, a supermarket or anything of that nature, a strip mall, those are considered private property for purposes of establishing rules for recording. And the property owner can set the rules about the taking of photographs, the recording of conversations, or the recording of people by video purposes. And they can ask you to leave the property. They can arrest you for trespassing. They cannot take your camera. They cannot take your phone. They cannot make you open it, nor can law enforcement. Police officers may not confiscate your phone. They cannot confiscate your camera or recording device. They may not demand to see it without a warrant. They can't look at the pictures you took or the video you snapped. You cannot do it, and they cannot do it. If you consent to it, that's up to you. But in terms of them demanding that they do it, they are not permitted to. They have to go get a warrant to do so, absent an emergency, like a person's life is on the line. That is all I have for you regarding today's ChrisChat. If you have any questions, I'll stick around for a little bit. Be happy to answer them. But otherwise, just keep in mind, public places, you can record anything. Private places, you are restricted by the private property owner. And at all points when you're dealing with law enforcement, you are permitted to record them, audio and video, as long as you are not interfering with them doing their job. That's basically the rules. So I will, with that, I will sign off. If there are any questions about this, by all means, post them here. If I missed a question, I will try to go back and look it up and get an answer to you. But otherwise, my name is Christopher DiOrio, and this has been ChrisChat.